Thank you. Thanks so much. So yeah, today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's happening with the storytelling online and media online that we're maybe not really recognizing, but it's just happening as we go along. But it's actually leading to a fundamental change in the way we all tell stories, or maybe not as much as a change as a different way of doing something that we actually did before we invented the printing press. That's why I've called it Life After the Printing Press. I'm going to get back to that, but just to start with one of the things. So I call it the media triangle, and it's this effect where we have all this media floating around in the cloud. You know, it's uploaded through all these services, Vimeo, Instagram, all these places that we create content on. And then what's begun to happen is that we tag all of it. So if you notice, when I started working on the project I'm working on now, 2 years ago, we talked about hashtags as something that would become sort of a currency online, and people would want the right hashtags, and it would be the main way to find each other. And that's 2 years ago, and people back then were not really sure about that thesis. They were like, man, I don't know. And now, like, you know, hashtags are everywhere. You can't see a billboard without hashtag. And what it's doing is creating this folksonomy, if you will, where we can find stuff. And then, of course, we have the gadgets that we do it with, the smartphones and the tablets and all these things. And that sort of triangle creates this amazing synergy of stuff that's out there that can be pulled together and used for things. So the paradigm, when I started, I'm originally a journalist, and when I started working as a journalist, you know, you would do your own things and you would have them published somewhere. But now we're actually starting to do these mashups and remixes and collections and of all these things. Again, it's still like the early days, and there's some pretty simple examples of it. But just to give you one little example, it's this one. Let's see if I can play it. So it's a street in Austria, I think it is, and they've actually just recorded the whole street with video, and then they've integrated with Twitter and YouTube and other services. So you can walk into different things and you can see live tweets taking place, different places on the street, and so on. And this is, like, technology-wise really easy to do actually nowadays, but it's still something that you would never see in any other type of media, print, broadcast, radio, and so on. And if we start to brainstorm about bringing these things together, you can actually come up with some pretty amazing scenarios. So the other big thing that I'm sure there's also a lot of other people talking about on this conference is the idea that there's all these sensors broadcasting and transmitting information. So actually, you know, it's not just us creating a photo or some piece of content. It's actually everything, all the gadgets, everything around us that's creating all this this data, this content, this information that we can use for storytelling, essentially. I always try to, because of my background, I always look at all these new technologies from a storytelling point of view, and it's actually a really interesting point of view to take on these things. So one example of how this is being used is the cab company in San Francisco, the official yellow cab. Of course, it's San Francisco. They've open sourced they opened up their API. So developers can use the data from the GPSs in the cabs. So one of the projects is this little map where you can see where the cabs are driving at different types of day and so on. But it actually tells a story about the city, because you can see which neighborhoods people don't want to go into, or at least the cabs don't want to go into at night and so on. So they've also tried to, or started to use it for urban planning and things like that. So stories come out of these things. The other thing is, and this goes back to the printing press thing. So when we invented the printing press, we basically started thinking linear. So we started writing. We started writing before this, but But we started constructing stories in a very linear form, and that's sort of become what we all do and how we all think about stories. But before then, it was actually much more interactive. That's why I call it the campfire, because you were sitting around a campfire telling each other stories, and you could interrupt. You could, as a storyteller, you could take the story in a different direction if you wanted to. It was actually a lot more like what we just heard about with the museum hack. And if it's businessmen coming in, you take them one place. If it's other people, you take them another place, and so on. So it's really interactive. And the interesting thing is that the online format is actually enabling us to break the timeline and sort of reintroducing this very human, very natural way of telling a story. So we can all experience stories individually. The same story can be totally different for me than it is for one of you guys, because we make choices. So one little example I have is this project called The And, which is an interactive documentary about relationship. Is it running? Let's see. You start out by making a few choices. So they've asked questions for 30 couples, and then they ask you the same questions. And then based on what you answer, they construct a movie for you. So everybody sees a different kind of movie. It's the same project, but it's sort of put together in a different way depending on your choices. So you'll see two people, and you get all these different options. And they've actually taken it further, so you can also print out the choices and do your own thing and so on. So it becomes even more interactive. And the other thing is, so this element that I call collective creation. So when I started out doing all this interactive stuff, I saw a huge potential in this idea of breaking the timeline. I was really fascinated by creating stories with layers of information and different directions and all this. But this was before social media, and then social media came, and I mean, to be honest, I was actually not really an open or an early adopter of social media. And then I started working on a project for photographers to help them. It was an online creation platform where you could upload your photos and videos and so on, and create little interactive stories where you could put hotspots on that allowed people to choose different directions and so on. And I got an investor there, Joey Ito, who is now director of MIT Media Lab, and I went to Tokyo to visit him. And then when I went back from Tokyo, I was on Twitter and all these different, like a myriad of different social media platforms that he had invested in. And then it started to dawn on me. At first I was thinking, okay, this is really sort of scratching the surface, and I came from this background of very deep, long format documentaries, and I was like, this is just like posting little things, and then it started to dawn on me, and it took a really long time, that actually it's not the individual post, it's the sum of all these things that creates like this collective story. And what's happening now is that we're moving into this next generation where via tags and via all these things, you're actually starting to be able to like tap into some of these collective stories. So for instance, like all these millions, billions of photos on Instagram are all tagged, and if you select a different, a couple of tags, you can get a stream of specific photos about something. So it could, there's one example that I'm working with at the moment called Everyday Africa. So it was a documentary photographer who was shooting for National Geographic and so on from Africa, and he noticed that he was also doing his personal Instagram photos with his iPhone, and and it was two very different stories. One was like drama and famine and war, and one was like just a photo of a nice kid playing in the street or the receptionist at the hotel, and these Everyday Africa stories. And then he started posting it on Instagram with this hashtag, and then others started using that hashtag as well. And now mainstream media like Al Jazeera has started taking those photos and doing little stories out of them. And so it's this everyday Africa hashtag with like billions of photos have become this collective story. And a lot of them are maybe not that good, but in this huge pile of stuff, there's still some real amazing gems of photos. Another thing is this idea of remixing stuff and working together. So I have a good example of that, which is the artist GOTYE, who had the hit a few years ago, and he put up a video, or of course it was a big hit, and he had a video and it was on YouTube, and then people started taking that and playing little sections of it, and they would also upload their own videos and so on. And as an artist, he started embracing that. So he actually took all those little things that people had done and created a remix of his own song. I don't think we have sound. Oh yeah, we do.
Now I do a little fancy picking on that, by the way. It's just...
So it goes on and plays the whole song. There's other real great examples. If you go to TED, there's a really great TED talk about a world choir, where there's a conductor that's asking people all over the world to sing little pieces of a choir piece, and then he puts it together digitally, and it becomes this really amazing piece. So basically, the new CAMPFIRE is this amazing grid of little tiny pieces that we all create, and then we can all merge together to our own individual stories. So this idea of somebody doing a linear story and then posting publishing it somewhere, and then all of us have to just watch that story the way it was created, is really sort of disappearing online. I'm not saying it's disappearing altogether, because it's great to watch a good movie and it's great to read a magazine, but I think we're seeing the real sort of DNA of the internet in terms of storytelling emerge now these years, and I think that's pretty exciting. So I think that's my part. Thanks.